One of the reasons why home ownership is coupled to wellbeing outcomes in Australia isn't so much the mortgage versus rent, it's the security versus insecurity.
Welcome to Future Fit Leadership, a podcast for emerging, experienced and executive leaders to build community, grow capability and future focus their career pathways. There has been a global shift in how we lead, and our conversations with leaders and executives explores the skills, strategies and mindsets that is needed to thrive in this ever-evolving landscape of the future. So whether you are a seasoned executive, an aspiring leader, or simply curious about the future of leadership, we are here to give you practical insights to unlock your potential, change the status quo, and break open our assumptions on how work works. Produced in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives, Future Fit Leadership is your place for bite-sized learning for executives hungry to make a change. Hello and welcome to Future Fit Leadership. I'm your host, Sadhna Smiles, and I hope wherever you are listening to this podcast, you are well. In a world where housing affordability feels like an impossible dream, where cities are changing faster than we can comprehend, and where the traditional pathways to property ownership are being challenged, let's ask the question of ourselves, what if there was a different way? Today, we're deep diving into the future of urban living, property investment, and the innovative solutions that are reshaping how we think about home ownership. Our guest is Lucinda Hartley, a serial entrepreneur, urban designer, and co-founder of Mondas, a groundbreaking shared equity home loan platform that's challenging everything we thought we knew about getting onto the property ladder. But this just isn't another conversation about real estate. Today, we're exploring the human stories behind the stats, how where you live can literally predict how long you will live, why community matters more than the square meters, and how technology and AI are transforming the way we think about wealth, work, and home. Lucinda brings a unique perspective. She's not just an observer, but a creator. From reimagining city spaces to developing data-driven insights about neighborhood dynamics, she's been at the forefront of understanding how our built environment shapes our lives. So whether you're a frustrated first home buyer, a curious millennial or Gen Z wondering how you'll ever own property, or simply someone who wants to understand the changing landscape of Australian cities, this episode is for you. Please enjoy my conversation with Lucinda Hartley. Hello, Lucinda, and welcome to Future Fit Leadership. How are you today?
Hey, so good. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I'm really looking forward to our conversation, all things economy and property and what you're seeing around lending, etc. But I do want to talk about some of the other businesses that you were involved in. Mondas is the one that we're going to talk about predominantly, but you've also done a co-founder of Neighbourlytics. And tell us more about these businesses. I love the fact that you're clearly a serial entrepreneur and you've got,
a 7-year attention span.
Yeah.
Look, my background is as an urban designer, and I think that's an important point to note because the consistent thread, which is consistent to me, perhaps not from the outside, with all of these ventures is taking steps towards making cities better for people and looking for niches that fill unmet needs in the way that we're planning and designing cities that help leverage good value for shareholders and investors, but also leverage value for communities and local economies. So Co-Design Studio was a placemaking consultancy. Now, placemaking is a field of practice that blends community engagement with design and essentially helps to it's like having a startup approach to city building. So it's about creating lighter, quicker, cheaper experiments rather than long-term investments. So you might close a street for a Sunday afternoon and turn it into a play street instead of building a $200,000 park. And so it's about building community and local economies through these lighter, quicker, cheaper experiments. At the time, 15 years ago now, that was an absolutely controversial idea in Australia. If you removed a car park, the sky would fall. Anything to do with public space is highly, highly regulated, as you can imagine. And so the thought that you might temporarily change something and build a pop-up space was so significant that at one point someone called the police on one of our projects in Sydney. So we've just come so far. And so with that organization, we were set up as a social enterprise and really worked with property developers and governments to help them find new value for vacant and underutilized spaces in the city. So whether that was turning like a car park that was run down and not used into a community center, or turning a street that was perhaps like not very safe into a play space. And we did hundreds of these projects across Australia, and we're really able to help build momentum for that movement. And that was a really exciting space to be in. Interestingly, with that business, we came to a point where a lot of that work didn't need to be led by us anymore. So we were able to champion the tools, the processes, how you work through the insurance and the regulatory systems for those kinds of projects, and helped local government do it themselves, helped local businesses do it themselves, to the point that we didn't need to exist in such a formal way anymore, which is actually like,
that's a good thing, isn't it? It's a
the
great
kind of
way
definition of success for a social
Yeah.
enterprise is that you can kind of make yourself redundant in that way. And walking around today, I'm sure, like we see all the time, like cafes who've taken over car parking spaces, and we see temporary pop-up spaces. This was something that people called the police about 15 years ago, and now it's like an adopted part of how we create great cities. So that was really exciting.
And what about neighbourlytics?
Yeah, so one of the challenges in doing that kind of work with those pop-up spaces is that the value that you create often isn't about the physical environment. It's about the local economy that benefits. And I remember we measured one project, which was a street closure in Point Cook. And we found that by closing the street in partnership with the community organisation for 3 months, that the traders' revenue increased 300%, and that 2/3 of people who came to that space met a new neighbour. It wasn't about the metre squared of AstroTurf that we laid, it was all of these other metrics. And then when we looked more broadly at the way that property developers were deciding on what to build where and how governments were leading their strategies, the only data and inputs that they were using were about the physical environment. They were looking at units of housing and metre squared of retail area and how fast the traffic was moving. But we know what actually drives ROI for a neighbourhood, why property prices in some suburbs go up and others don't, isn't about whether the buildings are 5 or 6 stories. It's about whether it's got that local economy and culture and community. And so rather than doing that in a very qualitative way, which we had historically done through organisations like Co-Design Studio, we wanted to look at whether we could do it in a quantitative and data-driven way. And now, we're now talking sort of 2017, 2018, we're at a point in time where all of our lives are online, and we're all carrying around a GPS tracking device in our pockets. And there is access to data at an anonymized kind of herd level, not personalized, that gives us trends and patterns about where people go, where they spend time, what they love and value. And we're able to create a really unique data set that tapped into that human and behavioral data to start to quantifiably measure why some people visited certain shopping centres and not others, and where the movement patterns were, and how that then correlated to rental rates and mortgage rates and other economic factors. So that was really looking at filling a gap in the market, but also trying to look at, a different way of solving that problem of how we build cities that are more people-centred.
And that really ties into my next question around this, because currently in Australia, we require 1.2 million homes by 2029. Yep. We can't keep building suburbs, 30, 40 kilometres out of the city. We've got to start building them in inner city environments. But with that comes the design piece, because I don't want to look at a concrete jungle. I want green space. I want to be able to have an apartment I can have kids in. I don't want to move every time I have a change in lifestyle. And I know there's no easy answer. I think one of my concerns is if we don't start working towards the solution for this in creative ways, then we will have a problem, because, it's 1.2 million homes by 2029, but next year that number's going to grow, and the year after that the number's going to grow, and we don't seem to have creative solutions around that. I'm not asking you for a solution to this question, but what are your thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a huge target. It's one that we also are well behind already. Like to meet that, I think we needed to build something in the order of 220, 250,000 dwellings last year. And we maxed out at 170,000 or something. Check those figures, but it's something we were short.
Yeah.
It's a multifaceted problem, but the things that I largely think about is that it's 4 times more expensive to build on the fringe. So the actual home might be cheaper to construct, a standalone home, in a paddock, not around anything else, okay. But someone, taxpayers, you might be paying it through your contribution fees over time, has to pay for the roads, the sewer, the supermarket, the school, everything else that comes
The
in there.
Kmart, the Bunnings, the Woolies, the Coles.
Right.
Yeah.
All of it. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have any growth in the fringe, because we need to do both, but only doing that is actually incredibly expensive. It's not a very economic way to build. Also, you're then situating often homes away from jobs. So you're creating commuter problems. The state government policy in Victoria and similar in New South Wales is around 70-30, so wanting to see 70% of development in established areas rather than on the fringe. In practice, that's actually not happening. It's more like the other way. But the policy would say that it is more economic for us to put higher density development around railway stations, around existing services. Now, the challenge with that is that the quality and the provision. So if you do double the population in an area, how do you accommodate for the additional schools, the green space that you need? You can't double the population and not provide any more open space. You can't have more people living in high density and not have more shared facilities. So there is still a need to provide more infrastructure when you upgrade. But I think one of the really difficult things in Australia is we've had so many bad examples of high density that it's uncommon that people would want to choose that choice over the fringe, which then drives consumer demand on the fringe rather than in established areas. So that's part of the cultural dialogue we need to shift. And we also need really good examples. And yeah, I would love to live in an apartment. I haven't been able to find one that suits my family lifestyle. So I'm in a townhouse at the moment, which is kind of my compromise, but actually I would prefer to live in an apartment. I'm one of the minority people. I just can't find the right stock. So yeah, we've certainly got good examples to look for from around the world, but changing mindsets and providing great high quality examples is part of the equation.
Because Australia has always been that aspirational piece where we all want to own that quarter-acre block of land. And 20 years ago, that was much easier to do. Today, it's a lot harder. We've got to shift from owning the quarter-acre block of land to airspace, because that's what an apartment is, really, isn't it? You owning airspace as such. It's a real shift. I want to talk about affordability issues and migration. I read in one of the publications that you did that Sydney is now the second least affordable city after Hong Kong. And when I read that, I was like, oh my God, how do we ever get there? How do we ever get there? And then, the other piece around that, we've got to reduce the number of migrants because that adds to the housing pressure stock. But then part of that is if we reduce migrants, we actually add to the pressures
on other parts of the economy.
Yeah. So it's like a fine balance, isn't it, between the two?
Yeah. And I'll say probably at the outset that I'm pro-migration in this part of the conversation. I mean, within limits, but I think our economy relies on it. I think it adds incredible benefit to Australia overall. I think there is a housing challenge and it's not the only factor. Yeah, Sydney is second most unaffordable city in the world. And in general, Australia has one of the most unaffordable markets. So it will on average take you 10 years now to save for a 20% housing deposit. In Sydney, it's more like 15 or 16 years. 20 years ago, it would have taken you 5 years, and in the 80s, like 2 or 3 years. So you're looking at mortgages that are 10, 12 times income. So unless you have some kind of intergenerational support, it's very, very difficult to get into the market at all. And so part of that is a housing shortage problem, but it's also the dynamics that we have that wage growth has been fairly fixed to CPI, while housing growth has been historically increasing at 5 or 6%. So housing prices have, depending on where you are, increased between 3 and 6 times the rate of wage growth. And so we're out of sync there. So, one argument would be grow the economy, grow wages, and everyone's got more money involved. There are certainly more dramatic measures that could be taken around the way that policy and tax incentives work around housing. That's controversial because it will impact people in the short term, but certainly a lot of the experts from Grattan Institute or in Alan Coller's research will say that phasing out things like negative gearing will correct the surge in that difference between wage growth and property pricing growth, because you're decoupling like personal tax benefit from shelter, even though both of them are considered investments in that way. Yeah, so I think the challenge with migration is it can be very, very concentrated, and that's probably where it needs to be considered. Not that we shouldn't have it, period, but that if the majority of migrants are living in Melbourne and Sydney, then that's going to create pressures in cities where the housing production isn't in line with that. So it may be that to move around, it can be paced with the rate that we're building homes. That was Alan Kohler's argument, that we should pace migration rates with our delivery rate of new homes. It's one argument. And another would be to distribute. You don't always have to be on site for the work that you're doing, and to remove the pressure on major cities while we catch up on our housing supply.
They're not bad ideas, really.
Yeah.
I read somewhere as well, affordable housing or affordable home ownership is fundamental to our well-being. Tell me more about how that impacts the fact that, we have an issue around affordability. How does that impact an individual's well-being?
Yeah, so this is really interesting social health research, because there's an argument to say, like, housing is so unaffordable, we'll never get there, just rent.
Yeah,
Like,
you'll rent for
just
the
rent.
rest of your life,
Just rent. And
yeah.
in many countries they do. And is there anything so bad about that? I don't think there's anything bad with renting. I think if rental is our future, which it probably is in a lot of ways, particularly generationally, we have to change our rental laws so that there is more security over tenancies. One of the reasons why home ownership is coupled to wellbeing outcomes in Australia isn't so much the mortgage versus rent, it's the security versus insecurity. So knowing that you have security over your tenure is a huge peace of mind. So if I just give my personal example here, I had to move 3 times in 3 years with a family, because, like, landlords, for whatever reason, choose that they want to kick me out and put the rent up. They want to move back themselves, all things which are well within their rights to do. But, if you're trying to, like, live near a school, get kids settled, like, that kind of pattern is stressful and exhausting. Like, moving, there's a lot of research that correlates, like, moving house is up there with, divorce and death as some of the most stressful things that you'll do in your life, because it's very unsettling. So it's less about rent versus mortgage, but more about security versus insecurity. So I feel like that's one part of it, that we can shore up our rental situation so that we don't, you can paint the walls, you can put holes in the walls, you can have a 10-year lease and have some security that your kids are going to be able to go to that school, for example. Those things, like we see in Europe, would certainly benefit Australia. On the other part of that, there are some well-being arguments around being able to sort of say nest, and that's not necessarily a gendered thing, but, like, just as humans, we like to make our home. And at the moment in Australia, with the way that rental laws are, we only really have that level of permission to change something, add a deck, paint this, when we own it. So having that sense of home in place is part of that sense of belonging that our human biological nature craves. I feel like we can change our rental regulations to be able to provide tenants of that, tenants, not tenants, in our rental situation, but we're not there yet, which is one of the arguments and drivers towards home ownership for many.
Talking about the security piece, I want to add another layer to this, and I'd be interested to know what you think about it. Because if we're looking at a whole generation of renters, what happens when they retire? Because currently, when you look at how we retire, every calculator you go to will make the assumption in the hope that you own your property outright. So that's your asset. You fully paid it down. You may have whatever you've got in your super account, but that asset is designed to get you
free shelter, sitting on an asset.
Correct. You're not paying any mortgage, etc. So have we thought about, if we have a generation of renters, how do we need to change how we support people when they get old? Because that's part of this insecurity, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's a fundamental shift. And we certainly have a cultural ideology that you grow up, you find a partner, you buy a house with a yard, and it's probably in a half decent suburb, and then you do absolutely anything else and you'll be fine, because your mortgage will be paid off and you'll live in a good area. And so even if you're living off the age pension or other things, then you've got shelter. Our entire super system is structured around that assumption, and in 20 years' time it will not be true. So I feel like we will absolutely need to see different regulation around pensions of all kinds in that space that assume that people will be renting and not low rent, right? Like rent has been increasing faster than property in a lot of areas. It's gone up 30% since the pandemic. It's 7% a year in lots of areas. So that's not a small part of your income that's going up like that. Yeah, I feel like there is many different reference points that need to shift to accommodate what is likely to be the case around that. Even if we're able to correct property pricing to some level, increase wages, increase supply, even if we're able to work with structures like Mondas and others to help more people get in homes, and we absolutely should do that, we are still going to face a majority of the Gen Zs and below who are renting. So that is a real challenge for us to think about. It doesn't mean that there can't be other wealth creation measures. I mean, statistically, you'll make a lot more money off the stock market than you will off property pricing. At 4% growth, you're likely to have much more than that in a diversified portfolio. So thinking about different investment strategies like that as well.
What are your thoughts on rent vesting? It's something that I did. So, post my separation, divorce, I didn't own property, but I knew I had to get into the property market.
Yep.
And so I rented and I bought investment properties. And then I was able to, leverage into my own property after that.
Yep.
So what are your thoughts on, because I know people say, well, we can't get in the property market maybe to own and live because it's not in the area that you work and play in. But I could buy a country property that's still significantly increasing at a great rate and then leverage off that. What are your thoughts on that?
I think rent vesting is a great way to get into the market to provide some kind of financial security, be a good landlord. I think all of these things are like, if you're a good landlord, then you're still providing rent for other people. And that's a good option. I think rent vesting does provide some of that stopgap, and it depends what fundamental problem that we're trying to solve here. Like, we still have an overall shortage and overall sort of shelter challenge, but I think the idea that you can live where you want to live, I'm a huge advocate of like how there are many forms of wealth, and your asset ownership over your home is one of them, but the neighborhood that you live in and the things that you access, whether it's near your friends, the parks that you like, able to walk, they're all other forms of wealth that contribute to our lives. And so if rent vesting helps you live that kind of lifestyle that's right for you, then I think it's a really good option to offer security. I think increasingly people are looking at that because mortgage for a primary residence is out of reach. Philosophically, I would love that we fix the home ownership problem first, and so that the primary asset you're investing in is also where you live. But I also absolutely understand the constraints in the market and think that it's a really good option for a lot of people.
Yeah. So this is where Mondas comes in. So talk to us, because you do a shared equity home loan model, which is very different to the traditional model of buying into property. So talk to us about what you do that's so different.
Sure. So the biggest gap for many homeowners is the deposit. So there's a huge proportion of the population, we estimate around 600,000 in Australia, who are currently renting and who could service a reasonable sized mortgage from their income. However, because rent is increasing 6-7% a year, they're not able to save the 20% deposit, which is in the order of $150,000 to $200,000 for a $700,000-$900,000 home these days, on top of their rent and outgoings.
Their rent,
which is completely understandable. So you can be on a decent, say, $150,000 wage, which is very decent in Australia, but still, like, you're giving a huge portion of that away to rent and other costs, and there isn't enough to save at that level. It'll still take you a decade to save for the deposit. And by the time you've saved that, property prices will have increased again to another level that you're just perpetually going to be priced out. So Mondas solves that gap with shared equity. Now, shared equity is a co-investment in the property. Australia has had shared equity as a government scheme for around 20 years in some states, and it's been around in the UK and other places. It's not a new scheme. Ours operates slightly differently in that we will pay for the deposit, the on-cost, the loan, so up to 25%. So say if you were looking to buy a $700,000 property, we would you would need $140,000 deposit. We would pay for that. We would pay for your conveyancing and other things. You'll end up with essentially slightly more than 100% loan, because it's the loan and the deposit plus the rest of it. And then in exchange for us putting up that money, we then profit share on the capital gain of the property. So we don't own a stake in the property. So the difference between the way that the government shared equity works and Mondas is that the homeowner still has 100% ownership of the property. We're not a shareholder in the property per se, but we do.
But
have
you're
an
not on the
interest in it.
title. So you're
We're not on the title.
Not on the title.
No.
So let's run through the numbers, right? So if I bought something that was 700K and you put 145 on costs and everything else onto this, and I sold the property in, I don't know, let's say 10 years.
Yeah.
How much? So I have the opportunity to repay down the money that I've borrowed off you. So the 120% that I've borrowed off you, I can pay that down at normal rates, I assume.
Yeah. So the way that our particular model works is, in an ideal situation, is that we help homeowners buy in high growth areas.
Yep.
So we're not available everywhere in Australia right now, because we feel it's in the benefit of the homeowners to help them buy in higher growth suburbs. So of the 15,300 suburbs in Australia at the moment, we've only qualified 40 of those that meet our forecast growth criteria. They're still in large areas of Brisbane, Perth. So there's plenty to choose from. Help homeowners get into their property, and then at 5 years, we help them refinance.
Right.
So if you buy in an area that's got 8% growth, so in places like Brisbane at the moment, the growth is around 15%. So 8% is quite reasonable. And you bought a $700,000 property, after 5 years, that's worth $1 million.
Yep.
You've made essentially 300 grand in equity right there. So Mondas can take its stake of the shared equity at that 5-year point, help that homeowner refinance, and then we're out, and the homeowner is sort of on their way.
And that refinancing can be done with any mortgage house that provides you with the most competitive rates.
That's right. Yeah. We certainly help our homeowners do that, because we have certain banks that we partner with that have approved our model and that we can work with more easily. But it is possible for them to refinance with any bank at that point, get the most competitive rate. If the property growth is slower, which, we don't have an exact crystal ball, then we can extend and say it's after 10 years that they've reached that milestone. But our goal is to co-invest. The homeowner will pay interest only in our component rather than paying it down. And then we will make the gain back through the capital growth in the property. And essentially they've earned their deposit by getting in sooner, is the way that the model works.
Yeah. Okay. And how has the market reacted to this?
We have had unbelievable demand. Our waiting list is much longer than we can service. So in our first fund, which we deployed last year, we advertised for only a matter of weeks and only in our priority suburbs. And within a matter of weeks, we had over 1,000 applicants. We qualified 150 of those. We were able to deploy 5 loans in that first fund. So there was significantly more demand than we were able to service. And so off the back of that proof of concept, I guess we've raised a much more significant fund that will enable us to do many, the next 100 at least.
And so that was going to be my next question, is where are you getting your funding from? Is it just private equity who are investing?
Yeah, so wholesale debt facilities through a banking partner is where we're accessing the capital at the moment. There's significant interest from private equity to also extend that in the future. I think the thing that's really important for us is to try to keep the interest rate competitive. So there are many ways that we could provide that secondary capital. Like, I guess, we help the homeowner find the 80% mortgage as well. So, you've got your regular 80% mortgage, the 20% that we're talking about, wanting to have the most competitive interest rate on that, because essentially the gain that we make is we all benefit from having capital growth in the property. We're not really here to charge the highest interest fee that we can. And so certainly there are certain partnerships that we've been able to structure blended debt to bring the interest rate right down. And that's what I think makes it really appealing for home seekers in that space.
What are the risks associated with it? Like if I'm listening to this and I want to get into the property market and it all sounds too good to be true, what are the risks associated with it from a homeowner's perspective?
Yeah. Well, you have to be sure that you're able to service what's effectively 100% mortgage. And so we qualify very, very rigorously, as we do more due diligence than a bank would do. We also try to qualify what the homeowner situation would look like at year 5 when we do the refinance. And so, if you could afford an 80% mortgage, which is most mortgage calculators will be based on assuming you have a 20% deposit.
Yep.
If you can actually afford 100% mortgage, then there shouldn't be much risk. But if 100% mortgage is an absolute stretch goal, we probably aren't able to qualify you, but that would be a risk as a homeowner of taking on more debt than you can service. And so
no matter where you go, really, whether it's you guys or anyone, it's a huge risk. And if interest rates go up and you can't service what you've currently got, you have a problem.
Yeah, that's right. So we're really looking, we qualify very heavily to ensure that we are not putting anyone under pressure and that our product is helping the customers that we work with. There's always a risk that property doesn't increase to the level that we think it will. That's something that is never even. So what we expect is that our forecast model, some of them will overshoot, some of them will undershoot, and will be on average okay. I think we're pre-qualifying again the property and the suburb much, much more heavily than other schemes have. So the government scheme doesn't require you to live in a particular location, and that's fine. It shouldn't. That's the purpose of public money like that. But equally, you may buy a home that holds static value. And so when you sell and the government takes their share, you're, in the same position as you were. We expect that some will go up, some will go down. And for us, really what that means is how long is Mondas a partner with that home seeker. We've recently, for example, helped a homeowner in Perth. We were able to help them buy a distressed property at 20% below market value. And so even like right now, they're already halfway through the growth valuation. So we may be able to help them refinance at year 2 or 3 rather than year 5. We're definitely going to see other situations where for whatever reason, the growth doesn't hit 8%, it's at 5 and we wait for 10 years. But we do try to mitigate that risk as much as possible by being rigorous in the analysis of where we buy.
What are some of the things you're using to qualify an area or a suburb?
Yeah, well, this is something that is a real passion of mine, and it's really, I guess, it's our core intelligence at Mondas, but it's also the perspective that we bring to this equation. There are a million property forecasting models out there. Like I could go and pull down like 20 of them right now. What I find,
and they'll all be slightly different.
Not quite different.
Yeah.
I mean, as in they're so different that some of them completely disagree. And that's hard
scary.
to do, right? Like that's normally you'll get an error margin in the data, but the fact that they might like completely disagree is alarming. What almost all of them do though is that they're designed for property investors. And that's fine, that's their purpose. But an owner occupier has different needs. We're really wanting to help people get long-term to become part of that suburb. And so the weighting and the value that you put on things like local amenities, walkability, schools, community, things that you're probably more likely to find in established suburbs, for example, is much higher than you might if you were just looking at a growth rate anywhere. And so we particularly wait for those factors for owner occupiers, thinking that we want people to be able to get into homes and stay and build their life there.
Interesting. Let's talk about Generation Z, because I can imagine that they will be probably a majority of your clients. Or
well, look, we're looking at
be.
younger millennials. As an elder millennial, my sister reminds me, these are definitely the younger millennials who are sort of on the cusp of Gen Z. And Gen Z ultimately, absolutely too.
Yeah, because their ability to participate in the market, we don't want a whole renting generation, which is potentially what they will end up being. So hopefully your solution is able to be broadened out as you get more and more investors on, and a generation, the quarter of our workforce will be looking for housing at some point, won't they?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're the bank of mum and dad for the generation that that doesn't have it.
That mum and dad can't help them with, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there is, from the research that we've looked at Gen Z, there's absolutely still the strongest appetite to buy housing as we've seen in other generations. I think it's dampened with reality that may not be possible. And I think that's actually a really disheartening conversation to have. That I think even with millennials, you see millennials being in their 30s mostly these days, for early 40s, that they have the desire for home ownership. And, with moving some things around, it may still be possible. I think Gen Z have that desire for home ownership, and it feels more hopeless. A lot that we've spoken to are looking more at rent vesting. That isn't for the Mondas model because we only do owner occupier, but that is certainly a pathway that many are looking at as their way to move into the property market. I also think, philosophically, this isn't a Mondas and other question, just we need better examples of smaller, higher density housing. And that maybe we don't have to live in the largest homes in the world, which Australia does. And, Gen Z don't necessarily do that either, by the way. But, if we were able to live more compact, we can fit more people in.
More people in, yeah. How is AI changing all of this? Because I think one of the frustrations that I often get is how long it takes for a lending house to process my loan or the application of the loan. And, and it does hold up settlements and offers and auction day, whatever or however I want to participate. So how are you seeing technology actually impact and change some of these processes?
Yeah, so for us, AI is a really central part of our credit and risk engine. So how fast we can validate and assess what customers' position is. We are still beholden at times to the partner banks on their processes as well. But a lot of these things, it's not only that it can be automated, it's that AI can potentially find different trends and different risk profiles that we're not traditionally great at looking at. And I can see that in the positive as well. So traditional banks are very conservative on things like the type of income you have. So if you're a sole trader or, do casual work, then that will be seen as not qualifying in many cases for a mortgage. I'm one of those people. I'm one of those people who has very consistent dollar figure income, but coming from all kinds of different sources that banks don't like. But what an AI can do is look at your historical credit record and your banking data over time and look at all those pieces of income and draw the trend to actually go you've never missed a bill, you've always been in surplus here, you're saving this much. So therefore, just because you don't have a corporate job doesn't mean that person with a corporate job who might have more erratic spending behavior is a more secure bet from a banking perspective than the person with a sole trader income. Now, we're not doing that yet, but that's where I really hope that our model will grow to. And the main reason is if we look at what the work behavior is of Gen Z and millennials to a large extent as well, is that they don't have one corporate job. They don't have one job period. They're much more likely to have multiple forms of income. They'll have a side hustle here. A corporate job is not necessarily secure anymore either. So how we think about risk can be augmented and ameliorated, I think, to a large extent with more data that AI can help analyze.
I think side hustles are more common than what we realize. I just don't think a lot of people talk about it, because it's not seen as the norm. And I remember someone giving me this advice, this financial advice, years and years and years ago, before the word side hustle was even a thing, where they said you need to have multiple sources of income.
Yeah.
So your PAYG, that's what you have is one source of income, but make sure that you have multiple sources of income. They may not all be making you a lot of money, but they all make you some money, and along the way it all adds up to the money you need to have the life that you need. And I'm the side hustle queen. I've probably got about 4 or 5 different things happening at the same time, but it was great advice that person gave me, because I think also maybe post-COVID, there's a generation post-COVID that have gone into the side hustle because we were all at home with time potentially in our hands, and we've gone off, and more women have done the side hustle thing than probably ever before as well.
Absolutely. It's absolutely on the rise. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I think ING did a really interesting report on the income from side hustles and Gen Z, and it's huge.
Huge.
And I think, the nature of work is changing. And so what we think of as a secure job is changing as well. So that's going to, I think, throw a little bit of the spanner in the works in how we think about things like credit and risk and loan decisioning.
You and I met at a conference last year. One of the things you talked about on stage, which I was so fascinated with, is your postcode can predict your life expectancy. Yeah. And I remember sitting there going, how? And how is my postcode related to how long I'm going to live? So tell me, Lucinda, how is my postcode going to predict my life expectancy?
Yeah, so this is a piece of research originally done by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in the US about 10 years ago, and it's a longitudinal study that they're still continuing, but it's also been replicated in Australia with different university organizations. And what they correlated was that, your causes of early death and where you live were highly correlated. And I absolutely fell off my chair when I first read that report, because as someone whose job it is to plan and design cities, I'm like, how after generations of city planning are we getting it so far wrong? And so when I really dived into it, there's 3 core areas that are likely to influence life expectancy. And it's because they have an influence on your social determinants of health, what would be called, social researchers would call, like, how your environment influences your health outcomes. So one of them is access to fresh food. So if you're able to walk to or have local fresh food in your neighborhood, whether it's a supermarket or a greengrocer, and it might seem really obvious, but in a lot of new suburbs, the housing may be there earlier. And if you can't easily access it, then you're going to access what you can access locally, which tends to be fast food. And so then that has other health outcomes if your nutrition isn't readily available. So that's one thing. The second is walkability. So, and walkability is really just a jargon term to measure, like, how much of your daily needs can you walk to? So can you walk to, whether or not you choose to is a different equation, but can you walk to a park, a school, a childcare centre, a cafe, a supermarket, doctor, pharmacy in your neighbourhood? It's called 15-minute neighbourhoods by some policymakers, or 20-minute neighbourhoods, but do you have all of those things? And if you're able to walk to it, if it's convenient, if it's close, one, you are more likely to walk, so more steps. But the second is you're more likely to get access to all of that level of care. So if you live in a neighborhood where there is no medical care, there is no pharmacy, like, are you going to fill your script on time? Are you going to follow up your doctor's appointment? Like, if it's a half-hour drive, and, all of these things become more constrained. So it becomes more difficult. Established suburbs, inner suburbs, those that were built pre-car, have a higher walk score or likelihood of walking. The third one is social connection. And so that's your interaction with neighbours and other people in your neighbourhood. So you might have friends and family in your neighbourhood. Great. That's one form of social connection. That's called bonding capital by social researchers, or close ties, your friends and family. But there's another form of social connection that we absolutely need as humans, and that's bridging capital, or the weak ties. It's the kind of relationship that you have with strangers that you walk past in the street. It might be making eye contact with someone in the hallway of your apartment block. It's knowing your neighbors by name. It's going to the same cafe every day and knowing the barista by name. Your colleagues that you work with, these are all examples of weak ties that we need in our lives, not just because it's nice to have, it's actually one of our fundamental, biological needs. And it's also why we're increasingly lonely these days, is not because we don't have friends and family. We do. We just have much less interaction with strangers. And so good neighborhood design, like a really well-designed apartment building, will have communal spaces. You'll have spaces in the hall where you can congregate and see other people. You might, if you're all walking to the shops, you're more likely to see others. You mightn't be friends with them, but you're just making friendly eye contact.
You'll have a park that people take their dogs for a walk and stuff like that, and you see the same people all the time. Interesting.
So the combination of those 3 is very significant. So they're the top line. There's many, many factors that fit below that: green space, trees, and all those things. But in somewhere like Sydney, if you're in the northern beaches versus in Hawkesbury, it could be up to a 10-year life expectancy gap. Yeah, and it's a same in, like, if you're looking at somewhere like Campbell well, or sort of like the inner eastern suburbs of Melbourne compared to sort of the north and northeast, like around Melton, St Albans, it could be up to a decade in average life expectancy. So there's a big difference with our city design and our health outcomes.
So like
Income has part to that as well.
Everyone listening to this podcast may be going, where do I find out whether my suburbs can allow me to have a longer life or not? Where do we find out some of this research?
Yeah, so I mean, it's all available through the census, but it's very difficult to access. So it's actually something that I'm curious to build into a model that is accessible, because when we talk about different forms of wealth, right? Income, investment, that's one form of wealth. Well-being, if you don't have your health, it doesn't really matter how wealthy you are, right? So thinking about some of those other factors, those neighborhood wealth factors, like community, like amenity shops and other things like that, to make more visible.
Lucinda, I could talk to you all morning. I've got like 1,000 other questions I haven't asked you, but we've come to the end of our conversation for today. I've no doubt we'll be talking again. If people are interested in following you around some of the research that you do, and certainly talking to you about the work that you are doing with Mondas, how is the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, so check out the Mondas website. It's mymondas.com if you're interested to learn more about our shared equity model. On the broader trends and themes, I have a weekly newsletter on my Substack. It's just Substack Lucinda Hartley. You'll find that, or we can follow on LinkedIn and I can connect you to the right pathway as well.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time. As usual, a fascinating conversation, and I look forward
to... You let me talk about all my favorite topics.
I know, and you clearly nailed it, because you just, boom, you went straight into it. It was fantastic. But I have no doubt we'll be talking again very soon. Thank you, Lucinda.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
If you like what you've heard, please share, rate and review this podcast. And don't forget to share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. The producer of Future Fit Leadership is Maritza Barone from Guide Your Light Network. If you would like to reach out to me, please DM me on any of my social media platforms. I'm available for speaking at conferences or consulting to your business. Future Fit is created in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives. If you'd like to join the community and receive a free takeaway each week, sign up to the Future Exchange app in my show notes. Thank you for having me in your space. This is a Guide Your Light Network production, creating podcasts with purpose.